I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who found himself in this situation, standing in the middle of a freezing parking garage, gripping a key so tightly my knuckles turned white, my breath coming out in short, sharp bursts of steam. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, casting a sickly yellow glow over the concrete floor, the cold seeping into my bones despite the heavy jacket I wore. I could hear the faint echoes of voices from the stairwell, distant laughter, the sound of heels clicking against concrete. I wasn't supposed to be here, not like this, not waiting to confirm the one thing that had been gnawing at me for weeks. But here I was, heart pounding, every nerve in my body telling me to get the hell out before I saw something I couldn't take back. It started 2 weeks ago when Olivia came home late from a supposed work dinner at the hospital. It wasn't the lateness that got to me, she worked insane hours, and these things happened. It was the way she smelled when she walked through the door. Perfume, but not hers, something stronger, muskier, almost like it belonged to a man. I didn't say anything at first, just kissed her on the cheek like I always did. But when she pulled away too quickly, avoiding my eyes, I felt the first crack in the foundation of our marriage. I let it slide that night, but once you notice something, once you have even the smallest suspicion, everything starts looking like evidence. The next morning, I woke up before her and found her scrubs in the laundry basket, crumpled up like she'd ripped them off in a hurry. I wasn't the kind of guy to dig through my wife's clothes, but something in me needed answers. I reached into the pocket and pulled out a valet ticket, dated the night before, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. She had told me she was at a restaurant with her colleagues, but the ticket was for a high-end hotel downtown. My stomach turned to stone. I shoved the ticket back into her pocket and left for work without saying a word. For days, I wrestled with myself, trying to justify it, trying to make sense of it in a way that didn't involve betrayal. Maybe the restaurant was in the hotel. Maybe she had parked there because the hospital covered valet costs for business dinners. Maybe, God, maybe I was just being paranoid. But then, the lies started stacking up. Little things. A necklace I had never seen before resting on her nightstand, the way she turned her phone screen down whenever I walked by, the sudden and complete disinterest in me physically. We did dry spells before, every couple does, but this wasn't a dry spell. This was distance. And it felt deliberate. I decided to test her, just to see if she'd slip. "Hey, Liv," I said one night while she was brushing her hair in the mirror. "What was the name of the restaurant you went to last week?" My coworker's looking for a place to take his wife. Her hand paused mid-stroke, just for a second, before she continued. "Oh, Belmont's, I think?" "Yeah, Belmont's." It was nice, a little overpriced, though. I already knew the answer. Belmont's didn't have valet parking. That was the moment I knew. But knowing and proving are two different things. A man can't just accuse his wife of cheating without evidence, not unless he wants to look like a paranoid asshole. I needed something concrete, something undeniable, something that she couldn't twist or explain away. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. She told me she had another work dinner. Same excuse, same fake smile. I waited 10 minutes after she left, then grabbed my jacket and keys and drove downtown. I parked a block away from the hotel and watched from a distance, my stomach twisting itself into knots. She pulled into the valet, stepped out of the car, and smoothed her dress, red, tight-fitting, not the kind of thing you wear for a work dinner. I watched as she walked into the hotel lobby, her head tilted slightly downward like she was trying not to be noticed. I felt sick. I could have left then. I could have turned around, driven home, and let the doubt eat me alive, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. So I walked into the hotel, keeping my distance, blending in with the other guests. I kept my head down, moving toward the lounge area, pretending to check my phone as I scanned the room. And then I saw her. She wasn't alone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident smirk that made me want to put my fist through his teeth. He leaned in close, his hand on the small of her back, whispering something into her ear that made her laugh, the way she used to laugh with me. My heart hammered against my ribs, my breathing shallow as I watched her place a hand on his chest, fingers lingering just a little too long. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe, to think. I needed more. If I confronted her here, she'd deny it, make me look like a jealous, insecure husband. I needed her to go all the way, to expose herself completely. I turned and walked out before I did something reckless. That's how I ended up here, 2 days later, in a parking garage, waiting for the moment she would betray me beyond redemption. The hotel was predictable, too obvious, too easy to track, so she had changed tactics. I overheard her on the phone this morning while she was in the shower, telling someone she'd meet them at the usual place. I barely heard it over the running water, but it was enough. I knew it wasn't the hospital. I knew it wasn't her sister's. I followed her again, this time keeping a safe distance, my heart racing the entire way. She pulled into the parking garage of an office building, one that was half empty on weekends. Smart. Less chance of running into someone she knew. I parked on the opposite side, waiting. Minutes passed. My breathing slowed, my pulse steadied. Then, I saw them. She walked across the garage, her heels clicking against the concrete. He was waiting by an elevator, dressed too casually for a business meeting. He smiled when he saw her, reaching out, pulling her into an embrace that lasted too long. Then, the final nail in the coffin. She kissed him. Not a polite peck. Not a friendly goodbye. A real kiss, deep, full of something I hadn't seen in her eyes in months. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside together. As the doors slid shut, I felt something inside me break. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind something cold, something calculating. I didn't need to confront her now. I didn't need to scream or punch walls or throw accusations. I just needed to make sure she paid for this in a way she'd never forget. I didn't go home right away. There was no point. If I walked through that door now, I wouldn't be able to pretend, wouldn't be able to keep my mouth shut or stop my hands from shaking. I sat in my car, staring at the closed elevator doors where she had disappeared with him, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could feel the leather creaking under my palms. My heart was still hammering, but it wasn't just anger anymore. It was something sharper, something colder, something final. I needed to be smart. A man doesn't survive something like this by acting on impulse. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. Wasn't going to let her cry or make excuses or turn this around on me like I was some insecure husband imagining things. No, I needed a plan, and that meant I needed information. I started my car, pulled out of the garage, and drove aimlessly through the city, letting the streetlights flicker past while I sorted through my thoughts. I had a name, at least. The man she was meeting, the one who had touched her like she belonged to him. I didn't know much about him yet, but I knew enough. He worked in the same office, probably met her between shifts, probably whispered just enough of the right words to make her feel special, to make her believe that sneaking around in parking garages and hotels was worth throwing away everything we had built. I gritted my teeth, forcing my hands to relax on the wheel before I tore through the leather. I made a stop before heading home. There was an old friend of mine, a guy who owed me a favor, someone who had a knack for pulling information out of places most people wouldn't think to look. I parked outside his shop, an unassuming little office squeezed between a pawn shop and a laundromat, and stepped inside. The bell on the door jingled, and from behind a cluttered desk, Frank looked up, raising an eyebrow when he saw me. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What's up?" "I need you to find someone for me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "A guy who works at Mercy General. I don't have his full name, but I can get it." Frank studied me for a moment, tapping a pen against his desk. "This about something work-related?" "No," I said. "It's personal." That was all I had to say. Frank nodded, dropping the pen and pulling his laptop closer. "Give me what you got. I'll see what I can dig up." I gave him the details, everything I had seen, every piece of information Olivia had unknowingly given me. He typed away, his fingers moving fast over the keys. I watched, feeling an odd sense of detachment, like I was observing someone else's life unravel instead of my own. After a few minutes, Frank let out a low whistle. Well, he muttered. "Looks like your guy's name is Aaron Lowell. Works in office. Single, no kids, no wife. Looks like he transferred here from Chicago last year. Been at the company about 10 months. 10 months. Almost exactly the same amount of time Olivia had been acting different." Frank glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly. "You want me to keep digging?" "Not yet," I said. "I just needed a name." Frank didn't ask questions. He just nodded, shutting his laptop. "You know where to find me if you need anything else." I left the office feeling strangely lighter. There was something about having a name, a face, a place to direct all the emotions boiling inside me that made everything clearer. I wasn't walking into this blind anymore. Olivia had made a choice, and now it was my turn. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. The house was dark, quiet, the kind of stillness that used to feel comforting but now just felt empty. I walked inside, locking the door behind me, and found Olivia asleep in bed, curled up on her side like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just spent her evening with another man. I stood there for a long time, watching her, my stomach twisting at the sight of her, at the thought of how easily she had lied to me, at the thought of her hands on him. I could have woken her up right then. I could have ripped the covers off, thrown the evidence in her face, demanded an explanation. But what was the point? There was nothing she could say that would undo what I had seen. I needed to be patient. I needed to make sure when I confronted her, it was on my terms, not hers. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I grabbed an old duffel bag from the closet, stuffed it with some clothes, and walked back out. I needed time to think, and I wasn't going to find it under the same roof as her. Before I left, I took her phone from the nightstand. I wasn't stupid enough to try and unlock it. Not yet, but I powered it off and slid it into my pocket. Let her wonder where it went when she woke up. Let her panic a little. I had plans to make. I sat in my car outside a cheap motel on the other side of town, staring at the glowing red vacancy sign while trying to decide if I had made the right choice by leaving the house. The engine hummed quietly, the heater fighting off the cold that had settled in my bones. Olivia was probably awake by now, realizing her phone was missing, checking the nightstand, under the pillows, retracing her steps from the night before, maybe even considering the idea that she had lost it. It wouldn't take long before she started to suspect me. That was fine. I wanted her to wonder. I wanted her to feel the same uncertainty I had been drowning in for weeks. I pulled out her phone and turned it on, watching as the screen lit up. The lock screen appeared, but that was expected. I had no interest in guessing her passcode when there were other ways to get what I needed. Instead, I waited. If she had anything to hide, if she had something urgent she needed to erase, she would have to come looking for me, and when she did, I'd be ready. I set the phone down on the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly, trying to keep my thoughts organized. I needed to confront her, but I needed to do it in a way that left no room for doubt, no room for her to manipulate the situation or turn things around on me. An hour passed before my own phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. "Where are you? Your car is gone." I let it sit. A few minutes later, another one came through. "Did you take my phone? I can't find it." I waited again, watching the messages stack up. "Daniel, answer me. This isn't funny." Then, a call. I let it ring out. Another call, then another. Each one went to voicemail, and with every unanswered attempt, I could feel her frustration growing. "If you have my phone, just say it. Why are you doing this?" I finally picked up, pressing the phone to my ear but saying nothing. "Daniel." Her voice was tense, a mix of confusion and irritation. "I have it," I said. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. "Why? You tell me," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Tell you what?" she asked, her tone shifting, turning defensive. "You're acting crazy right now. Did something happen?" "I don't know, Olivia. Did something happen? What is that supposed to mean?" I heard her moving, probably pacing, probably trying to piece together what I knew and what I didn't. That was good. I wanted her off balance. I wanted her to scramble the way I had been scrambling, to feel that same gnawing uncertainty. "You tell me," I repeated, leaning back against the headrest. "Where were you last night?" "I told you. Work dinner." I closed my eyes. Even now, even with me holding her phone, she was going to lie to my face. "At Belmont's, right?" "Yes," she said, but there was a hesitation this time, a small pause before the answer, just long enough to confirm everything I already knew. I let the silence drag out again, waiting to see if she'd crack. When she didn't, I spoke. "You parked in the garage at Westfield Tower." More silence. Then, quietly, "What?" "Valet tickets don't lie, Olivia. Neither do security cameras." She inhaled sharply. Were you following me?" "Do I need to?" I asked. "Because I already know what I'd find." She didn't answer right away. I could hear the slight shuffle of movement, the sound of her trying to steady her breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, careful. "You're jumping to conclusions." I almost laughed. "Am I?" "Daniel, listen to yourself. You stole my phone. You left in the middle of the night without saying anything, and now you're throwing accusations at me based on what? A valet ticket. Don't insult me," I said, my patience thinning. "We're past that." She sighed, the sound heavy, full of something that almost sounded like regret. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong." I clenched my jaw, biting down the anger threatening to surface. "Then tell me the truth." A long pause. Then, softer, "Come home." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No. Daniel, please," she said, her voice shifting again, trying to soften, trying to find a way in. We need to talk. We're talking now. Not like this. That's the only way this happens, I said. I'll come back when you're ready to be honest. Not before. Another silence. I could picture her standing in our bedroom, rubbing her forehead the way she always did when she was trying to think, trying to find the right words to fix a situation. But there were no right words. There was only one thing I wanted to hear, and she knew it. Finally, she exhaled sharply. Fine. I hung up before she could say anything else. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, taking in the tightness in my jaw, the way my eyes looked sharper, colder than I remembered. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least now, the pieces were moving the way I wanted them to. I tossed her phone onto the passenger seat and started the car. It was time to go home. When I walked through the front door, Olivia was already sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry, at least not openly, but there was a tightness in her posture, a careful calculation behind her eyes, like she was trying to decide which version of the truth would be enough to satisfy me without giving away more than she had to. Her phone was still in my pocket, but I didn't take it out. I wanted her to focus on me, not whatever she was afraid I might find on it. The house smelled like coffee, but there was no cup in front of her. She was waiting, probably running through a dozen different ways to spin whatever excuse she had settled on. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, leaning back slightly, letting the silence sit between us. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping lightly against the table before she stopped herself. Finally, she spoke. Are you ready to actually talk? That depends, I said. Are you ready to be honest? She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head slightly like I was the one being unreasonable. Daniel, you're making this into something it's not. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to see if she'd keep talking, if she'd start digging herself into a deeper hole before I even had to push. She didn't, though. She just watched me, waiting. Where were you last night? I asked, keeping my voice even. I already told you. Try again. Her jaw tightened. I was at a work dinner. With who? She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but I caught it. The usual people. Some of the workers from my department. Names. What? Give me names, I said. Who was there? She blinked, like she hadn't expected me to ask. Why does that matter? Because if you're telling the truth, it shouldn't be hard. She sat back in her chair, crossing her arms again. This isn't an interrogation. No, I said. It's a chance. A chance for what? For you to prove me wrong. She let out a short, frustrated breath, shaking her head. This is ridiculous. You were at Westfield Tower, I said, watching her closely. Not Belmont's. You lied to me. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching just enough to confirm it. But she recovered quickly, shaking her head. No, I don't. I cut in. I saw you. She froze, and for the first time, I saw something shift in her expression. A crack in the mask. I let the silence settle again, letting her feel the weight of it. Are you going to keep lying? She swallowed, her fingers curling slightly against her arms. It's not what you think. That's a convenient thing to say. She looked down, her jaw clenching, her mind racing to find a way out. It was a mistake, she said finally, her voice quieter. Which part? She hesitated again, then met my eyes. Meeting him. I let that sit for a moment, then tilted my head slightly. Him. She blinked, realizing her mistake, but it was too late. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table. Who is he? Daniel. Who is he, Olivia? She inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around her arms before she exhaled slowly. Aaron, she said, barely above a whisper. I nodded, my suspicions confirmed. And how long has it been going on? She looked away. It's not. How long? Her shoulders tensed. A few months. A few months, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. I didn't plan for this, she said, her voice shaking slightly. It just happened. That's not how things just happen. She rubbed her hands over her face, letting out a slow breath. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. I am. Not all of it. She dropped her hands, staring at me, her expression caught between guilt and frustration. What do you want, Daniel? Do you want me to beg for forgiveness? Do you want me to tell you it was meaningless? I want to know why, I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it, shaking her head slightly. I don't know. Her eyes snapped back to mine, her jaw tightening. I was lonely. I let out a sharp laugh. Lonely? That's your excuse. She flinched slightly, but held her ground. You've been distant for months. Always focused on work, always tired, always distracted. So that justifies sneaking around behind my back? No, she said quickly. It doesn't. But it's the truth. I sat back, running a hand over my jaw. So what now? She blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? I mean, are you done with him? She hesitated. Too long. I let out a slow breath, nodding. That's all I needed to know. She tensed. Daniel. I'll be staying somewhere else for a while, I said, standing up. Her eyes widened slightly. You're leaving. For now. She pushed her chair back, standing too. Can we at least talk about this? We just did. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. She just stood there, watching as I walked to the door. I paused for a moment, looking back at her one last time. This wasn't a mistake, Olivia, I said. It was a choice. Then I walked out. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the weight of everything Olivia had done settle into something sharper, something colder. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only clarity. There was no fixing this, no salvaging what she had destroyed. She hadn't made a mistake. She had made a choice, and choices had consequences. She thought she could do this to me, betray me for months, look me in the eye and lie, and still come out of this untouched. She thought I would just leave, maybe fight with her a little, go through the motions of anger, and then quietly disappear while she carried on with her life, free of guilt, free of accountability. That wasn't going to happen. If she thought she was walking away from this without losing something, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. I wasn't going to scream at her, wasn't going to punch walls or throw things or let her see how much she had broken me. That's what people like Olivia counted on, the idea that once the emotional outburst was over, once the storm had passed, things could go back to the way they were, or at least, close enough to it that she wouldn't have to face real consequences. No, I was going to be calm. I was going to be patient. And I was going to make sure she regretted this for the rest of her life. I needed leverage. I pulled out my phone and sent Frank a message. Find out everything you can about Aaron Lowell. Work history, personal life, financials, everything. Frank didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted him. I drove to a 24-hour diner on the other side of town, sat in a booth near the back, and waited. My phone sat on the table, face up, but Olivia didn't call. She didn't text. I had walked out of the house hours ago, taken her phone, exposed her lies, and she hadn't even tried to fix it. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry. Not really. She was just trying to figure out how to minimize the damage, how to regain control. She wouldn't be expecting what was coming next. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Got something interesting. Sending it now. A file appeared in the message thread. I opened it, scanned the contents, and felt the first real spark of satisfaction I had felt in weeks. Aaron Lowell wasn't just living a clean, respectable life. He had problems. Debt. A history of workplace complaints. Nothing criminal, nothing that would get him fired outright, but enough to paint a picture of the kind of man he was. He had transferred from an office in Chicago after a quiet HR investigation into an inappropriate relationship with a colleague. It hadn't gone anywhere, no formal charges, no public scandal, but it had been enough that he decided to leave. And that wasn't all. His finances were a disaster. Credit card debt, unpaid loans, barely scraping by despite his salary. He was living beyond his means, spending money he didn't have, probably trying to project an image of success he hadn't actually earned. He was desperate. That was good. Desperate men made mistakes. I leaned back in my seat, considering my options. Olivia had risked everything for this guy. She had thrown away our marriage, our life, for someone who was barely keeping his own together. That was almost pathetic. I needed to make sure he knew exactly what he had stepped into. I paid for my coffee and left the diner, heading straight for his apartment. Frank had pulled that information too, an overpriced high-rise in a part of the city he clearly couldn't afford. I parked across the street, waited, watched. His car was in the lot. Lights on in his unit. He was home. I stepped out, walked into the building, and took the elevator up to his floor. I didn't knock right away. I stood there, letting the anticipation build, then finally rapped my knuckles against the door. It took a few seconds, but then I heard movement. A pause. Then the door opened, and there he was. He didn't recognize me at first. He looked me up and down, confusion flickering across his face. "Can I help you?" "You're Aaron Lowell," I said. It wasn't a question. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of unease creeping in. "Yeah. Who are you?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I took a slow step forward. I'm Olivia's husband. He went pale. I watched the realization settle into his face, the way his throat bobbed as he swallowed, the way his fingers twitched slightly like he wasn't sure if he should shut the door or try to explain himself. She didn't tell you, did she? I said, tilting my head slightly. Didn't tell you I knew? Didn't tell you she got caught? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Listen, man, You what? I cut in. You're sorry? You didn't know she was married. I let out a short, humorless laugh. You knew. You just didn't care. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Look, I don't want any trouble, all right? Too late for that, I said. You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with another man's wife. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward the hallway, like he was debating whether or not he could get out of this. I stepped forward again, just enough to make him flinch. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice low and steady. You're going to end it. You're going to cut her off completely. No calls, no texts, no nothing. And if you ever so much as look at her again, I will make sure every single one of your problems becomes public knowledge. His eyes widened slightly. What does that mean? I pulled my phone out, tapped the screen, and held it up for him to see. His financial records, the HR complaints, everything Frank had found. His face drained of color. You're barely keeping your life together as it is, I said. Do you really want your employer knowing about this? Do you really want to lose your job? He shook his head quickly. No, Then stay away from her. I let the silence hang between us, watching the way his shoulders slumped slightly, the way the fight drained out of him. He knew he had no options. He nodded. Good, I said. Now get out of my sight. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, staring at the phone screen. This was just the beginning. I didn't go back home that night. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to step into that house again, not with the memories of Olivia's betrayal seeping into every corner. Instead, I checked into a hotel, turned off my phone for the first time in years, and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, feeling nothing. The anger was gone, the need for revenge satisfied, but in its place was something emptier, something quieter. Olivia would find out soon enough that Aaron had cut her off. Maybe she'd try to reach out to him. Maybe she'd beg. Maybe she'd cry. It didn't matter. That part of my life was over. All that was left now was cleaning up the mess and moving forward. The next morning, I powered my phone back on. Messages flooded in, several from Olivia, some from mutual friends who had no idea what had happened yet, a few missed calls from my boss. I ignored everything except one message from Frank. She's been trying to call him. Multiple times. No answer. I smirked slightly, then deleted the message. Olivia was probably panicking now, realizing something had shifted, realizing she no longer had control over the situation. She wasn't used to that. She had spent months living two lives, thinking she could balance them forever, thinking she could keep everything in her hands and come out unscathed. But now, everything was slipping through her fingers. I hoped it hurt. I showered, changed, and checked out of the hotel. There was no avoiding the next step. I had to go back, had to face Olivia one last time, and end this properly. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my decision was final. There was no reconciliation, no second chance. This marriage was over. When I walked inside, Olivia was sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand, her eyes snapping up to mine the second I stepped through the door. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept, like she had spent the night staring at her phone waiting for a response that never came. Where have you been? Her voice was raw, her fingers gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I shut the door behind me, walked past her without answering, and went straight to the bedroom. She followed. Daniel, talk to me. You just disappeared. I didn't know where you were. You knew exactly where I was, I said, opening the closet and pulling out a suitcase. Her breath hitched slightly. What are you doing? I didn't answer. I grabbed shirts, jeans, shoes, tossing them into the suitcase with no real care. Olivia stepped closer, her voice growing more desperate. Daniel, stop. Please. We need to talk. We already did. Not like this, she said quickly. Not after you, she hesitated, but I knew what she wanted to say. After you ruined things with Aaron. I zipped the suitcase shut, turned to face her. Do you love him? She flinched, shaking her head. No, it wasn't about that. Would you have left me for him? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. That's what I thought, I said. You wanted both. You wanted the safety of me and the excitement of him, but now that he's gone, you suddenly want to fight for this marriage. Tears welled in her eyes. I never wanted to lose you, Daniel. I let out a short breath, shaking my head. You lost me the second you chose him. She took a step forward, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. Daniel, please. I'll do anything to fix this. We can go to counseling, we can now. No, we can't, I said. Because I don't want to fix this. I want out. She shook her head rapidly. You don't mean that. You're angry, but we can work through this. We've been together for too long to throw it all away over one mistake. Stop calling it a mistake, I snapped. A mistake is something that happens once, something unplanned, something you regret the second it happens. You had a full-on relationship behind my back for months. You lied to me every single day. You knew exactly what you were doing. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry. I exhaled, feeling absolutely nothing for her anymore. It doesn't matter. She dropped her hands, staring at me, her expression shifting from desperation to something closer to realization. She finally understood that there was no fixing this, no version of this story where I forgave her, and we moved forward like nothing happened. I had already mourned our marriage. Now, I was just burying it. I grabbed my suitcase and walked toward the door. Olivia followed, but she didn't try to stop me. Where are you going to go? That's not your problem anymore. She let out a shaky breath. Are you really doing this? Yes. She looked down, nodding slightly. What happens now? Now, I said, we get divorced. She inhaled sharply but didn't argue. She knew it was over. I walked out the door and didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I moved into an apartment across town, filed for divorce, and cut off all unnecessary contact with Olivia. She called, she texted, she tried to talk, but I ignored it all. I was done with her. The divorce process took months, but I didn't care. Every paper signed, every document filed, every step closer to cutting her out of my life for good was a victory. Olivia lost more than she expected. I made sure of it. She lost the house, lost friends who sided with me, lost whatever image she had of herself as a woman who could juggle two lives without consequence. Aaron never resurfaced. I didn't expect him to. He was too much of a coward. I had ruined whatever fantasy he and Olivia had built, and without the thrill of sneaking around, there was nothing left for them. I focused on myself, my job, my own future. I took on bigger projects, built my reputation further, climbed the ranks faster than I ever had before. Without Olivia weighing me down, I felt free in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't easy, and some days, the bitterness still lingered, but I knew one thing for sure, I had made the right choice. Olivia had betrayed me, and I had made sure she paid for it. That was enough.